everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Introduction to Formulas. My name is Anna, and I'm a Product Marketing Manager here at Smartsheet. Today's webinar is the first in a two-part series focused on formulas. Today we're going to spend time on the basics, so learning how to reference cells and cell ranges. We'll then look at how Smartsheet is different when it comes to formulas, and we've actually developed some unique formulas that you can only find at Smartsheet to help you work more effectively across indented rows. We'll then look at some of the most common formulas that customers use to create metrics for dashboards and other reporting purposes. We're going to take some of these steps within the scope of a single sheet, and we'll of course look at how to create cross-sheet formulas for these purposes as well. One of the things that you're going to notice that's a little bit different at Smartsheet is that our columns actually have names that you customize as you build the structure of your sheet. When you're referencing a cell, then you're going to name that cell by using the name of your column as well as the row number it's in. If your column name has more than a single word, you'll want to include brackets. You can either reference a specific range by having two separate cells referenced, separated by a colon, or you can indicate an entire column simply by referencing the name of that column separated by a colon. Just as we looked at when we're referencing a cell, you'll always want to include those brackets if you do have more than a single word in the name of your column. Now that we're a little bit more familiar with how to reference cells and ranges in our formulas, let's look at some of those unique Smartsheet formulas that I referenced. We'll learn about these on our slides and then head into the first part of our demo to see them in action. When you're working in Smartsheet, you'll notice that you're able to indent or outdent rows to create structure, and this helps you really organize as well as focus when you're working in your sheet. In Smartsheet, any rows that are indented are called children, and any rows that are outdented are called parents. We're going to use the children formula to reference any rows that are indented below our formula. If I want to be more specific, I can actually reference that cell within my children parentheses. We're going to head into Smartsheet in just a moment so you can see this in action. The children formula counts one level in, but of course, if you have multiple levels of indent, there's a formula called descendants that you can use instead. You can think of the descendants formula as grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so on. We've covered a couple key formulas, and now let's head into the first part of our demo to see those in action. For today's demo, we will be using a sheet called Issue Tracker with Form available in the Smartsheet Solutions Center. Anytime that you're looking for a template, just select the plus sign on the left side of your Smartsheet and you can browse or search to find the template we're using today. For those of you that are live in the webinar, just click the template button and you'll be able to download this specific one for yourself. To get started with incorporating formulas to better understand the work that we're going to be managing in Smartsheet, I'm going to head over to the right rail of my sheet and select the Sheet Summary button. Sheet Summary is a great place to have high-level information about the work that's tracked in your sheet. So this is a great place to explain how your sheet works, reference who's responsible and who's working in this sheet, and of course to apply formulas to drive metrics. And this is going to create information to understand your work and also create information that you can later use to power dashboard widgets and dashboards, charts, and graphs. We're going to start by understanding how many high priority issues we currently have in our sheet. And you'll see the first indented section that I have tracks those high priority issues. We'll start by using a count formula. And a count formula is going to be one of the most common ones that you use because a lot of the questions that we get are, how many of my rows are red, yellow, or green? Or how many issues are assigned to each person on my team? And your count formula is going to help power all of that. We'll start by typing in count. And you'll see that anytime that you start a formula, Smartsheet's going to help you by showing formulas that match what you've typed in so far, and you can even get additional information about how that formula works, how the structure works, and a link to a help article in our Learning Center with more detailed information. When we're writing this formula, I have a couple different options. I can either head over to my sheet and simply select the items that are indented under my high priority section, and when I hit enter, you'll see it returns. I have two high priority options, or this is where we can start incorporating our children formula. This is going to be especially powerful because with the way that we've written the formula so far, we've referenced the rows that are underneath our high priority row. This is not a very dynamic formula. And what I mean by that is let's say I have a new issue that's high priority. You're going to notice that my formula didn't actually update. That's because my formula was very specific. It was only counting how many items were referenced in the cells that I used in my formula. Instead, I'm going to erase this section and just type in the word children. And then I'm going to reference a cell in my parent row, so in our dark blue row for high priority. When I do that, I'm telling Smartsheet, count how many rows are indented below high priority, so below our row 2. And this is very dynamic. So when I hit enter, it's counting 3 rows, but if I delete a row or if I add a row, it's always going to count how many rows are indented. This allows you to write a single formula and know that no matter how many tasks fall under your high priority parent row, you're never going to have to put in the work or need to remember to make changes to your formula to account for those. This also sets us up to write our next couple formulas. So I'm going to just repeat those same steps. I'll type in equals count. I'll type in the word children again. And then I'll reference the cell that is the parent row and then hit enter. One thing you'll notice that I don't do is I personally don't add my closing parentheses to my formula, and that's because Smartsheet is going to do that for me. This helps us a lot because in our advanced session where we start writing longer nested if formulas with 2, 3, 4, 5, a lot more parentheses to keep track of, we don't have to keep track of those. I can just hit enter and I'll know that Smartsheet is adding all my closing parentheses for me. So we'll do this one more time, just a little bit faster. I'll type in count children. I'll select my low priority parent and then I'll just hit enter. And now I've set up so easily looking in my sheet summary, I can understand how many issues I have for each of these 3 priorities. This is an example of how to use the children formula, and another formula that we looked at descendants. So to review, children means the next level of indent. If I had additional rows indented below my right rows, they would not be included. To count additional rows of indent, we're going to use our descendants formula. And I'm going to use that one to calculate the total number of issues across my entire sheet. I'll start with equals count again. I'll type in the word descendants this time instead of children. And then I'm going to select the cell that I want to look at to find all descendants of that cell. I'm going to actually show you one tip here as well. So far we've been working in our issue column. For descendants, I'm actually going to stick to my details column. When I use the count formula, I'm telling Smartsheet to count any cells that have a value in them, so any cells that are not blank. If I was counting descendants to this cell that has the word all issues in it, it would actually include the cells that say high priority, medium priority, low priority, closed, and new. Those are not issues, so I don't actually want to include them in my formula. By selecting the details cell instead, I'm telling Smartsheet, count any rows that are descendants, but make sure we're only counting in the details column. This way, where any of these blank cells are excluded, and I'm going to get an accurate count. We're going to see here then, I have 9 total issues. Now, to review what we've done so far in our sheet, we've used the children formula to count how many issues we have for each level of priority, and we've used our descendants formula to count how many issues we have total across our entire sheet. Now, let's head back to our slides and we'll learn about the opposite of children, which is the parent formula. The parent formula is used anytime that you want to reference a value of an outdented row. In our screenshot here, we're using the equals parent formula in our phase column, and that allows us to capture the parent of each of our indented rows. The parent formula is used to reference one level of outdent, and to go along with our parent formula, we also have our ancestors formula. And ancestors refers to any outdented rows, no matter how many levels we're discussing. These two formulas, I believe, are a little bit harder to understand in the abstract, so let's head back to our sheet. We're actually going to work to add 2 new columns to our sheet to see these formulas in action. First, we're going to start with our parent formula. I'd like to track what the priority is. And I don't want that just in my parent row. I want that to show up in every single row. I'll go ahead and add a new column to the left, and I'm going to just call this priority. And I'm going to type in equals parent, which is the formula that we just learned about. Now, parent allows me to tell Smartsheet, return the value that's the parent of the cell that I'm working in. So if I simply closed my parenthesis and hit enter, I wouldn't actually have a value because the parent to my cell is this cell, which is blank. I'll go ahead and type in the word parent so you can kind of see how this works. If I use the parent formula in the next cell, it would return the same value because it's just returning what's in our dark blue row. What I'd like to do instead is have Smartsheet capture the priority of each of these rows. So I'll go ahead and double click into my formula, and in my parentheses, I'm going to reference the issue 3 cell that I'm more concerned about. Here I'm telling Smartsheet, return the parent of this cell in the issue column. And I can copy that formula by selecting the cell in the issue column in row 4 as well. And this is all automatic, so as I move my rows around to different priorities, it's going to return to me the appropriate parent or the value that it's indented under. I can use the simple Control-C or Control-V to copy and paste, or I can hover my mouse over the bottom right of a cell and drag down, and this is a drag fill, so it basically copies the formula that you have to each of the rows below. When you're working with a formula that has a cell reference, so we started out working in row 3, as you copy your formula, whether you're using your keyboard shortcuts or using the drag fill that I just showed you, any of the copied formulas will continue to reference the same cell in the new formulas row. So you'll notice that even if I copy and paste by right-clicking and pasting, I never have to make changes to my formula. Smartsheet knows that I want the parent of the cell in the same row as my formula. We'll go ahead and save now, and now I can easily understand the priority of any of my tasks. And of course, because we're not doing this manually, we're allowing a formula to drive this information. As I move my issues around, the priority column will always update to return the parent of that particular issue. Next, I want to add a column that's going to help me track the level of indent of each of my rows. And appropriately, I'm going to just call this my level column. And this is something that I actually do for a lot of the sheets that I work in Smartsheet. Before we start writing our formula, I'm going to go ahead and actually turn all of the rows in my sheet white. You'll see why we're doing that in just a second. Now in my level column, we're going to use our ancestors formula to assign a number to represent the level that each row is at. I'll type in equal, we'll use our count formula again, and then this time we're going to add ancestors. Now for my top row, it's going to return a 0 because it's basically saying this row doesn't have any parents or grandparents or so on. I can copy this formula, and we just learned about doing the drag fill, all the way down my sheet. What this is going to do for me is you'll see it's assigned a level of indent to every row in my sheet. And this is a great way to drive conditional formatting. And this is why I turned my sheet white first so we can see this in action. We'll head up to our conditional formatting section, which allows me to write a rule to format how my sheet looks. Here, I'm going to tell Smartsheet if a row has level 1, I'd like to color it blue, and I'd like to have my font in white. What you're going to see in the background here is this is a great way to drive the formatting because as I work in my sheet, so if I make outdents or indents, these rules are going to drive the colors of these rows, and I no longer have to spend time manually doing that. This is also really powerful, and it's something that I use on my sheets to create filtered views. For our sheet here, we're not tracking too much information yet, but as you spend more time working in Smartsheet, as you have more collaborators, it becomes really helpful to be able to filter and focus on what you'd like to look at. So I can come up here to my filter section, select new filter, and let's say I only want to see the issues. I don't want to see any of my parent rows. Well, I'm going to tell Smartsheet, let's select a level and only show me the items that are level 2. And this gets rid of all the noise, it gets rid of all the hierarchy, and allows me to just look at what issues we're working on. So you'll see applying this level using the count ancestors formula sets you up to work more efficiently by applying conditional formatting as you work in indent or outdent rows, and to create these custom filters. Now, so far we've worked primarily in the scope of our one sheet. So we've applied formulas in sheet summary, creating these metrics to easily understand the work that we're managing. And we've created more specific formulas to really drive the information that we're tracking. Before we start working on our cross-sheet formulas, let's take a moment to talk about the count formula that we just looked at, and also to build on that. So the count formula is going to count any cells in the range that you reference. And we looked at how to count specific cells as well as use count combined with children and combined with ancestors. Both of those depend on selecting the range that you're going to be counting, but you can also create a count if formula to allow you to count based on criteria. If I incorporate count if instead, I'm telling Smartsheet, look in our phase column, but only count how many items say phase 1 in that column. Count if can also grow into a count ifs formula. So if I want to know how many tasks are in phase 1 but also yellow, I'll just continue to reference my range and state my criteria, and Smartsheet will return those values for me. Now that we've looked at the structure of how our count if, and countifs formulas work, let's head back into Smartsheet, and we're going to start building cross-sheet formulas on a separate metric sheet. So we're actually going to head out of our issue tracker sheet that we've spent our time in so far. The metric sheet that I have here is one that I've built from scratch, and all I want to do here is capture how many items in our issue tracker are assigned to each person on my team, how many items are each of our statuses, and we'll also capture how many items are each of these priorities, which is something we're already tracking on our sheet summary. We're already familiar with our count formula, so we're going to start now with COUNTIF instead. And instead of typing our formula from here on, I'm going to select Reference Another Sheet. We'll select our issue tracker with form sheet, and here we're going to be capturing how many issues are assigned to each person on our team. So I'm going to scroll here. We'll find our Assigned To column, and I can just click the entire column to reference it when I'm making a cross-sheet formula. And before I head back to my formula, I'm going to rename my sheet reference. What this field is up here is how do you want this reference to look in your formula? And most of the time it comes out pretty long, so I like to rename these. And then we'll select Insert Reference. I've now told Smartsheet in my range, which is that entire Assigned To column, we'll add a comma, and then we're going to type in our criterion. So I'll add in quotations and type in Alexandra's name. Close my quotations and then hit enter. Now my cross-sheet formula is working, so it's capturing for me that on our issue tracker sheet, 3 of the issues are assigned to Alexandra. Once you've written your formula for the first time, you don't have to go through all of those steps. Just like we did on our previous sheet, I can hover over the bottom right corner and simply drag down to copy my formula. And you'll see when I double click in, all I need to do then is change the name from Alexandra to June Taylor. This is where I can incorporate a couple tricks that are going to help make my formulas a little bit more efficient. So right now I can continue copying my formulas and typing in the name of the person that I'd like to count how many issues are assigned to them. Instead of making this really manual, which if you imagine a team of 10 people, 20 people, or 100 people, this can become pretty time consuming, I'm going to start incorporating a cell reference, which we talked about at the very beginning of this webinar. I'm actually going to erase Alexandra's name altogether, and instead I'm going to click on the cell that has her name in it. We're telling Smartsheet the exact same thing. We're saying look in that Assigned To column on our issue tracker sheet and count how many times Alexandra Matson is showing up in that column. The difference here is instead of typing in Alexandra's name, I'm pointing at a cell that has her name in it. The reason this becomes so handy is because when I copy my formula by drag filling later on, you're going to notice that my cell reference is very dynamic. So Smartsheet assumes as you copy your formula down the row, you want to always reference the cell that's in the same row as your formula. So this way, if I had 10, 20, or 100 people on my team, I only have to write a single formula and I can just drag fill all the way down without having to make any of those manual changes we were originally making to our formulas. I'll go ahead and save this sheet and let's go through those same steps again to understand our work, this time by status. I'll type in our equals COUNTIF formula. We're going to select our range, so we'll head back over to our issue tracker sheet. I'm going to select my RYG or my status or health column, depending on how you're using these symbols. And then hit Insert Reference. Here then, we already learned I can simply click on the cell that has the word green and copy my formula down the rest of these cells to understand the work. This is where I'm going to actually incorporate one more trick for you using a Smartsheet formula that we haven't looked at yet, called @row. Each of the formulas here, you'll notice, references the cell by indicating the name of the column as well as the row the cell is in. What I'm going to do to make my formula really dynamic is erase the row number and type in @row. And @row is a way of saying this same row that this formula is in. The reason this becomes really helpful is because as I copy my formula down, each of my formulas now looks exactly the same, makes it really easy to keep things consistent, and I'm always telling Smartsheet, count if, look in my health column or my RYG column on my issue tracker sheet, and then count how many times the value in my primary column here in this same row shows up. Now we'll go through this one more time to kind of bring it all together. So I'm going to tell Smartsheet equals count if. We'll reference our other sheet. And this is where we are actually going to reference a column that we built during this webinar called priority. And then I'll select insert reference. We can add our comma. And then I'm going to select the cell and we'll type in @row. So we're telling Smartsheet, count how many times the value in our primary column in this same row shows up. I can easily copy this formula by doing a drag fill, copy and paste. Really, any of those options will accomplish the same thing. And we've written one identical formula that's going to give us each of these different values. We can also add one additional layer to our count formula, where on our slides we talked about you can count if, and you can count ifs, which opens you up to adding multiple criteria when you're counting items. So let's say I want to know, in addition to how many issues are assigned to each person on my team, I want to know how many closed issues each person has. We can do that with a count ifs formula. I'll go ahead and first start off by copying our formula. That way we're not starting from scratch. And this formula already accounts for any items that are assigned to Alexandra. In order to add an additional criteria, I'll just add an S, making this a count ifs formula. And then we'll add a comma towards the end of our formula and keep going from there. The great thing about a count ifs formula is all you need to do is continue to add a range and a criteria. So to see this in action, let's head back to our issue tracker sheet. I'm going to select the column that we've called status and then insert our reference. So I've told Smartsheet now, let's look at any tasks that are assigned to Alexandra. But I also want to add in a comma and add in a criteria. So we're going to say any tasks that are assigned to Alexandra, but also have a status of closed. We can then copy our formula just like we've done so far. I'm going to see that Alexandra has a closed task and Henry has a closed task. I want to incorporate one more formula into this sheet using our cost column. This formula is going to actually be a sum formula. So it's going to have a similar structure to the count and count ifs formulas we just looked at, but this time we're going to incorporate adding together and adding based on criteria as well. What we're going to do is actually look at the cost of issues by the person that they're assigned to. So we're going to start off with our sum if formula. And you'll notice that the sum if formula has 3 parts to it. We're working with 2 separate ranges. We're going to start with a range and a criteria. So we're going to tell Smartsheet again, let's look at our assigned to column and find anything that's assigned to Alexandra. So far this is going to look pretty similar to the formulas that we've already written, and I'll incorporate our new @row formula as well. Next, we're going to add our sum range, and a sum range means for any of the rows that are assigned to Alexandra, this is the column you should look in to add up the values that we're looking for. This is going to be our cost column. Once I've written my formula, Smartsheet's going to find that out of the issues that are assigned to Alexandra, the total cost is $400. Since we've optimized our formula, so we've worked and we've created it using these at-row formulas, I can simply select and do a drag fill, and I now have an understanding of the total cost by the person it's assigned to for all the members of my team. I'll also incorporate one last formula into our sheet, and we're going to just use a sum formula with no criteria, and we'll go ahead and sum up the children. So it'll tell me across the members of my team what the total cost is. Now, before we finish up for today, let's go ahead and review the various concepts that we've learned over the course of this webinar. We learned about referencing cells in Smartsheet using the name of the column combined with the row number. We also spent a lot of time looking at the formulas that Smartsheet has developed to help you work efficiently. And these are here to help you work across indented rows using children for a single level of indent and descendants for any levels of indent, as well as parents and ancestors. To review, the parent formula is a great way to capture what a row is indented under. So in our example, we're able to assign a priority based on a parent row. And our ancestors formula is powerful because it allows us to assign a level of indent by counting ancestors. And this can be used to power conditional formatting, filters, and report views. Lastly, a lot of the metrics that you're going to be creating using formulas are going to fall under either a count or a sum formula. And this will allow you to really understand the work that you're managing in Smartsheet and generate the kind of information that you'll want to highlight on a Smartsheet dashboard, in its sheet summary, or in a metric sheet. As I mentioned at the start of this webinar, we do have an advanced formulas webinar coming up a week from today. You can register for that still by heading over to smartsheet.com/webinars. There are additional resources for you as well. So we started our webinar today looking at the issue tracker template that we used for the course of this session. You can head back to the Smartsheet Solution Center and download a template called Smartsheet Formula Examples. As with all of our templates, once you download this, it's your own sheet. And this is a great way to view how formulas work for the various types of information and formulas in Smartsheet. And also, because it's your own sheet, you have the freedom to play around with the formulas and really understand the structure and even copy it to your own sheets as needed. Our Smartsheet Learning Center has help content about any of the formulas that I've discussed, as well as any of the formulas that are available throughout Smartsheet. We've gone a couple minutes over our webinar time today, and I do want to make sure to answer a couple of the questions that we've seen over the course of the webinar. And then, as always, remind you that any questions that haven't been answered, you'll absolutely receive a reply by email over the course of the next day. Couple questions came in about downloading the template that we used today, as well as downloading the Formulas Resources template, both of which are available by selecting the plus button in the left panel anytime you're signed into Smartsheet. The template used today was called Issue Tracker with Form and can be downloaded by searching for just the phrase Issue Tracker. And then to download an interactive template with a list of all of the formulas as well as examples, just go ahead and search for formulas. We had a couple questions that can be answered with a nested if formula. So how do I insert the name of the day of the week according to the day in a row? Or how do I assign a quarter based on the date in the row? Things along those lines. And we're actually going to look at how to write these nested if formulas in our next webinar coming up next Thursday called Advanced Formulas. Head over to smartsheet.com/webinars to register for those. And this will also include steps to automate your symbol columns, check marks, and so on. A few of you are already thinking ahead and we're asking how to take a lot of the data that we came up with today, whether it's in sheet summary or on our metrics sheet, and surface that in a dashboard. And for that, I would actually recommend catching up on a webinar that we hosted a few months ago, which is actually a 2-part webinar. And I recommend part 1 if you'd like to learn about setting up the data for your dashboard. The part 2 of the dashboards webinar series was all about actually building your dashboard. So how to use the right widget, how to make your dashboard look great, and of course, share and collaborate. You can find a link to those webinars available at smartsheet.com/webinars. On the right side of the page is where you'll find all of the previous webinars that we've hosted. We did have a couple questions about using the count formulas on multi-select drop-down columns. We didn't include that in our sheet today, but we will cover a couple additional Smartsheet specific formulas to guide you in doing that in our advanced webinar as well. We have come to the end of our time today, so I wanted to take a second to remind everyone, as always, that we'll send a copy of this recording to anyone who has registered for our webinar, and you're free to share this with your colleagues or review at your own pace. As always, thanks so much everyone for joining, and I hope to see you back next week for Advanced Formulas.